Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to tune in and listen. I definitely appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. That's NEWBEES.com. And we now are an officially trademarked with a registered U.S. Patent and Trade Office registration. So we are now a real, true thing for whatever that means. All right, so I wanted to get an update, and it's been a while since I caught up with everybody and since we had a time to chat and share our feelings with one another. And I think that the biggest topic I want to hit on, I've got about 5 or 6 things I wanted to cover today. This is not a specific episode on a topic. It's really just kind of a hodgepodge of miscellaneous things that are going on. But I wanted to just kind of give you an update on a few things. And I also wanted to touch on probably the big issue right now, at least that I see, is the cold spell that we've been under lately. It has been here in the U.S., the temperatures pretty much everywhere have been significantly cooler than a lot of people are used to. I've noticed particularly down in the South, like in Florida. I think it was like Tampa the other day, Tampa, Florida. I saw something that said chance of snow. Now, I used to go to Tampa all the time. I used to do work down there in the Tampa area. And the idea of snow down there completely blows my mind. But they were talking about really, really cold temps all the way down as far as Miami. And that's just really unusual for Florida and for those parts of Florida. But it's all over the South. I mean, there's places I've seen, Atlanta, Montgomery, Alabama, all through the South, where it's been down in the teens and the 20s. And years ago, I used to do work with various entities throughout the Southeast. And I always loved going to see those customers because it was a nice break from the winter cold. But they have not been getting the break lately. And, this is what causes a lot of fear. So that's why I really wanted to talk to you pretty quickly here and hopefully, give you some assurance and settle you down a little bit. Very, very vivid memories of this where it's like, that this cold air is coming in. And for whatever reason, this winter has been the windiest winter I can remember. We have just had a lot of kind of like sustained cold air, blowing through the area. And I don't know what's going on with that, but it's a natural thing, particularly when you're new, to just want to, hug your baby bees and keep them warm. And when it starts getting really cold like this, it's easy to freak out. It's easy to kind of melt down and be like, no. So I completely get where you're coming from. And what I wanted to do is go over kind of some really generic information again, it's generic because of the fact that there are a lot of variables involved. So I'm hoping that once you hear some of these numbers, it'll maybe put your mind at ease a little bit and maybe, make it not seem, quite as bad or as catastrophic. So obviously, if it's colder outside than it normally is, the bees are going to work harder. The cluster is going to have to work more to create more energy. They are going to, of course, have to consume more honey to generate that heat. We've talked about this many times before, but for those of you who aren't familiar with this, they're using the same muscles that they use to fly. It's those same muscles that, when operated in one direction, will cause them to fly. And when they kind of reverse things a little bit, it causes them to just basically vibrate in place, generate heat, and then all of them together in that cluster creates enough heat to where it keeps the queen nice and warm in the middle. They kind of rotate inside and out so that those on the outside, or what they call the mantle, when they start getting a little cooler, they can work their way back in. And it's a nice little system that they have. But it does require energy. So if they're going to generate heat, they've got to have a source of energy. And that energy is coming from stored honey. Now, again, this is the part that I was telling you about that's going to be really super generic. And I tried to pick a temperature range that was kind of like what I am seeing and what I usually see. These are obviously going to vary based on your location, your particular hive setups, your individual races of bees. Different bees are more efficient than others. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, but this should be a little bit helpful. On an average week, if you are running at a temperature of around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, it's kind of like your average daily temperature. So that's going to be somewhere, I think, right around like 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, something like that. your bees are probably going to use about, on average, on the higher end, about 1 kilogram per week, or about 2 pounds, 2.2 technically, 2 pounds of honey per week at about 40 degrees. If you catch a spell, and let's say for one full week, your average temperature is around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think, I'm not super on Celsius here, I think that's going to put you right around like what, -8 or so Celsius, -10 maybe on the higher end. That's going to bump that consumption up about 60 to 90% higher. So you're going to be using somewhere between 3 and 4 pounds, or like 1.3 to 1.8 kilograms per week. So that is significant, but I want you to think about this. Again, the numbers I gave were around 2 pounds for 40 degrees Fahrenheit and around 3 to 4 on 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So we'll just say it's like a 1.5 pound difference. We'll just say 1.5 pounds per week. Now, 4 weeks in a month, so that's going to be 6 pounds of honey. So there's an extra 6 pounds of honey being used. And let's say that for whatever reason, which would be pretty unlikely, at least where I am, but let's just say that this happens for 2 months straight, and the bees use an extra 10 to 12 pounds of honey to make it through that spell. Well, my goal is always for my bees to have at least about 20 to 30% more than what they use on average, because I like to kind of weigh the bees going into the fall, winter, weigh the bees at the beginning of the spring, like towards the end of the winter, like really kind of coming up on this time of year, maybe another couple of weeks from now. That's where you would start weighing to figure out, okay, how much did it take to get through the winter? So that way, you know, this is what we started with, this is what we ended with. They used about X number of pounds to get through. But in this scenario, I very rarely would be in a situation with my bees where they didn't have like an extra 20 pounds anyway. And we don't have cold spells that are in the 20s for 8 weeks straight. You know, like I'll give you an example right now. I think that the next 10-day forecast for me has highs in the 30s. And then the last 4 days of that, so days like 7, 8, 9, and 10 on the 10-day, they're like in the 50s. Now we're going to have a little bit of rain with that, but it's still significantly warmer than 8 weeks of being in the 20s. So they'll probably use a lot less on those warmer weeks than they would on the cooler ones. So again, we're talking about through my entire winter here, maybe needing an extra 10 pounds. If I needed 40, I probably went into the winter with 55 or 60. So I'm not really worried about that. And again, it's not going to be an 8-week duration thing. It's going to be a 4-week duration thing. But you're going to be able to dial this in. Like you can easily do the weighing of your hives and know what these numbers are. And this is something I've encouraged, from the very beginning of the podcast, to make sure you're monitoring. And there are really cool things out there that you can spend money on, and you put them on your hives, and it maintains like an active monitoring of the weight of your hive. And it's really, really cool. I've actually found the sensors, and I think they're about $8 to $10 for a 4-pack. So I am integrating that into the hive monitoring project, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But, for about, with all the parts and things that go with it, I don't know, 25 or 30 bucks is what it'll cost to integrate that in, to the existing solution that I have there. And I'll be able to track those myself. But if you don't, and you don't have the ability to do that, don't feel like making one, like once I show you how to do it, maybe you can make that investment and be able to know exactly where they are at the beginning and end of the season. And I think that that's going to make a big difference for you. Now, when I say the season, I should have said at the beginning and the end of the winter, not the active bee season. So the key takeaway here is, yes, they are definitely going to use more energy when it's cold out. But as long as you and they working together did everything that needed to be done, back in the fall, late summer, early fall, all of that, it's not really an issue. And try not to worry yourself over something that hopefully should not be a big deal, which that actually leads me in perfectly well to my talking point number 2 here for the day. This is now the time of year. There are a lot of people who have a very differing philosophy from me. And as I've told you guys from the very beginning, everybody who keeps bees does things a little bit different, and that is great. I encourage that. I really, really want you to do what works for you. I want you to take information in from a bunch of people and then create a system that works for you. If you're the kind of person where and again, everybody's wired differently, right? But if you are wired to where you have to like read the manual and it says, here are the 10 steps and you have to do the 10 steps and that's just the way it has to be, you might struggle in beekeeping because there aren't a lot of people who live 5 or 10 miles away from you who wrote the bee book. If you're 5 or 10 miles away from the person who wrote the bee book, then you can probably follow everything they tell you. And as long as they're a reputable and credible source, you're going to have good information. You'll be great. But if you like to explore and try new things and do things differently, beekeeping is great and you'll do really, really well. Again, as long as you find a credible and reliable source because of all the bad information that's out there. But as you are fine-tuning your strategy, what I want you to do is take the information that I give you and say, okay, this is what Jeff does. Cool. And then when you listen to David Burns and Bob Binney and Cayman Reynolds and, Randy Oliver, Michael Palmer, whatever, Kelly, which is Paul Kelly. When you listen to all these other great beekeepers, take everything that they say, make a note and say, oh, okay, this person's doing this. That's pretty cool. And then try what you want to try in your apiary and see what works for you. The reason I'm giving you all of that is to get back to where I am right now. A lot of people, first warm day in, let's say, November, they open the hive and they want to look inside. Let's see where everything is. They catch a warm day in December. Let's look in the hive. We broke 50 in January. Let's look in the hive. I'm not going to fault anybody for that, but that is absolutely not my style. My approach has always been raise your bees, only take from the bees what is surplus. And if there is no surplus, then they keep everything. If they are running light or short, you feed them in the late summer, early fall, whenever you can, and then you leave them for the entire winter. The only time I ever personally intervene at all is starting in the month of February. Because what happens is a lot of people have taken the mindset that I have to constantly be finding ways to supplemental feed my bees all winter long. And that's just not the case. But again, what is your strategy? So this goes back to some of the discussions that we've had a million times around feeding. And there are people that you see, prominent people that you see who are excellent, amazing, exceptional beekeepers, and you see them feeding all summer and all fall. And you just think, okay, cool, I've got to do that. And then you got the guy who's like, oh yeah, make sure you put this box with 20 pounds of granulated sugar on top too. That's going to save the day, right? So you see these people doing this and you're like, okay, I better do the same thing. But what I want you to remember is those people, a lot of them, they're sitting there in, let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. I had watched a video that Cayman Reynolds had done. It's like probably a year or so ago, and he was overwintering some nukes. And a nuke is a small colony. It's, maybe 5 or 6 frames, depending on how you have your nuke set up. And he caught some warm weather like in January, February, and he's slapping pollen patties on there. Absolutely. You absolutely have to do that. When you're overwintering nukes and they don't have a lot of room to store, 40 or 50 pounds of honey that is surplus, yeah, you're going to have to intervene in that way. And that's part of his strategy. He is expanding and he is growing. And in order for those nukes to make it, he's going to have to help them out. Makes perfect sense. If you are Bob Binney, I watched a few of Bob's videos over the summer and you saw he was constantly feeding. Why? Because they're making new colonies. When you are trying to accelerate your growth, you're going to have to supplemental feed. You can't just rely on a colony that you've split, 5 ways. And now you've taken one colony into 5 and you're doing queen rearing and you're ramping everything up and just be like, well, hopefully there'll be enough here in the environment for them to make it and grow. You're going to have to help them out. They need a constant food source, high energy, high quality protein, high quality nectar. They need everything to be available. And that makes sense. So I want you guys to kind of be thinking about this on both sides to say, I have this goal and this is where I'm trying to get to. So in order for me to accomplish that, I have to do this. Not the opposing position where it's, I saw this person do that, so I'm going to do the same. Yours and their goals aren't going to be in alignment. Like Ian Stepler of Stepler Farms up there in Manitoba, I'm pretty sure it's Manitoba, up there in Canada, right? Ian is a honey producer. He's in livestock and cattle and other things, but he produces honey. To produce honey for sale, you have to steal the honey from the bees to replace that so that they have something to overwinter with. You're going to have to feed them, right? So feeding is not a bad thing. And you hear me, I pick on feeding a lot in the winter because you got to get the bees where they need to be going into the winter. And then, in my opinion, for my strategy for what I do, I breed from the queens that overwinter naturally. So if I don't have to spend $200 to get a colony from fall to March or April with all these supplemental feed, okay, it's probably not $200. Let's say it's $50 or $100. If I don't have to spend all that money to get those colonies to March or April, then that saves me money. I say, okay, cool. I had, let's say, 10 colonies and 2 of them didn't make it. Great. The remaining 8 are going to be the ones that I'm going to select my breeder queens from for that season. So that's my approach. That's what works for me. You develop the best approach that works for you. But what I will do in February is I say the first warm day, pretty much over like 50, 55. I'd like to see 60, but it doesn't always happen. I'm going to take a quick peek in the hive, and I want to see just how high up that they are. Now, if you can't get to a point where you can actually open the hive, but you still want to kind of check things out a little bit, there are different methods. Again, if you're not using an official weighing kind of technology, there are some people that I think they call it like the finger method or something like that, where you lift the back of the hive and however many fingers you can use to hold it up easily. That's kind of a ballpark of as to how much it weighs. I've seen people do that. I can't even remember who it was that did that technique. But that's one approach you could make if you wanted to try to just weigh the hive in place and say, oh, geez, this colony is down 30 pounds, and I think they only had about a surplus of 40, so they only have about 10 pounds left to make it. It's going to be a little bit tight. This is the time of year that I will consider intervention if it is a colony that I knew, for example, I did a late season split, and I just knew I was going to have to feed them through the fall, and they were going to struggle to get through the winter. I'm paying close attention to them. They're probably going to get a pollen patty or something, pretty early. You can even preemptively do that. You could say, look, I don't know. I'm not going to take a chance. I'm going to pop the outer cover off, pop the inner cover off, slap a patty on real quick and close it right back up pretty quickly, minimize the heat loss inside the hive, and just keep on trucking. But if you do that, if you have a day that's decently warm and you can take a peek in there, what I want you to look for is you want to look for the position of the bees within the hive. They're going to move up and down and left and right. They're going to move around as they consume honey. But on a typical, let's just assume that you have like a double deep configuration, and most of the food stores were up top. You probably had a few frames in the bottom, but let's say most of it is in the top box. If you look in and you can see on the sides that everything is consumed, that cluster is pretty much right in the middle, and there's not a whole lot left, you'll be able to look in and see a little bit. If you had to pull a frame out, you could pull a frame out if you wanted to. I generally do not ever do that in the wintertime. I just don't want to expose the bees to that much cold. And another thing that's really important to kind of support why I would not remove something even on a nice day, brood needs to be in that like 95 Fahrenheit kind of temperature. I think it's 34, 35 Celsius. They need to stay nice and warm. And this is the time of year where when they catch a few nice days in a row, they're going to start ramping up brood. They're going to say, okay, spring is here. I know we finally made it to spring. Let's start ramping up. As soon as there is something that is in the environment that they can grab, like here it's cedar, maple, juniper, elm. Those are all the things, alder. Those are all the things that I get all the allergy alerts for early in the season. That's right around the time when they start picking up on things that are available in the environment, and they're going to try to start raising new brood. So if you get in, you're pulling frames and you're poking around too much, you run the risk of that brood getting too cold and dying. So you don't want to stress the colony in that way, and you certainly don't want to be in a position where you're damaging such a valuable resource. Just do a quick confirmation of where the cluster is, see if you can assess what the remaining stores are, do a lift test or weigh them in some way if you can. But whether or not you decide to feed over the winter and you have the resource, if I only had one colony or maybe 2 colonies, I probably would be very interested in, feeding them or throwing a patty on or doing something to make sure they make it, because I would rather have a colony that I have on life support that I'm feeding just to get through the winter so they can make it to the spring. So I have a starting point for next year. I can always bring in a new queen, add some new genetics if I need to. But if you have one or two and then they don't make it, you've got nothing. So I'm not picking on anybody who likes to feed over the winter. I will still pick on people for dropping 5-pound bags of sugar inside the hive, but I'm not going to start that fight again today. All right, next on the list is an update on the hive monitoring project. I have like 90% of everything I need to finish it. As I was starting to do some soldering and starting to put some things together, there was a critical thing. It's more of kind of a safety issue than anything else, but it's kind of a critical piece of some components that I need to add into the circuitry just to make sure that nothing overheats and I end up like, I'm like monitoring a hive on fire kind of scenario. I'm really trying not to set the hive on fire. And in order to do that, I need to add it in just a few components, some resistors and a few other things. So I have a list of things that I need to get. It's well outside the budget right now. So I'm going to just pause that project and we'll have to revisit it a little bit later. It's not the kind of thing that needs to really be done and ready until like October, November timeframe. I was hoping to start doing some of the testing with it this winter. But like I said, from a budgeting standpoint, I'm so far above the budget that I originally had for it. We're just going to hit the pause button on that and, we'll figure it out later on. So that little bit of a pause there. The next is the Master Beekeeper program. This has been something that has been in the works for a really long time. And the team that I've assembled, the crew, they have been working kind of, I would say, pretty aggressively on things for a while. And we are at a point now where I think that we're trying to get that apprentice course released by mid to late April. The only big holdup that I have right now is I need to get fresh new footage for all of the videos. So everything that there is a video of a honeybee on or an image of a honeybee, I want current fresh material. I'm not going to use old things that I have from years ago. I want very specific, very targeted, high resolution imagery and video. So all of that's getting redone as soon as the bees get here in March and April. So that's going to be a full court press in the month of April to get all the video pieces wrapped up. But definitely within the next week, I have 3 videos that are going out. One of them is just a very generic explanation of the program. What is the program? The second one is, why we are different. What are we doing differently that other programs are not doing, that literally no other programs are doing at all? And then a discussion around certification and what it means and what it doesn't mean, and talk about how it compares with other industry certifications and things like that. So those 3 videos, those are 100% ready. I've got all my slides ready. That's just going to be me chatting with you, going through a couple of slides. They're probably like 3 to 5, probably about 5 minutes each. And those will all be released here shortly, talking about the specifics of the program. But right now, like I said, things are moving forward. I do start an eval in about another, I think it's mid-February. I will officially be on the learning platform that you guys will use to go through the classes. I'll be on that platform, getting everything loaded up, creating the quizzes. This is the funny part. Like in my mind, it was like, okay, I'm going to create a course and it's going to be cool and fun and exciting, and that's great. And then the first part I thought was that I have an idea and then I'm going to pass it to my team and they're going to say, yeah, that looks good. That did not happen. The team that I've assembled, I've sent things to them and then they really violently beat me up on a lot of things. It was a good beating, I guess I would say. They were very constructive and very positive, and they peer-reviewed things to a level that I would have never expected. So I'm extremely thrilled at the work they've done. But then the next component to it is just all the things in the background that you don't think about. Like I can stand up in front of, a group of people or sit down in a small group or whatever, and we can just talk all day long, and it's really easy. But creating all of the resources that you need, making sure that all the lessons are put together, the lesson plans, the objectives, supplemental materials, like follow-up stuff. And there's a whole lot of moving parts to it that is still very fun to do, and it's enjoyable, but it's a lot of work. But that is on target. Like I said, I'm probably going to do some kind of a pre-sale for that, like around mid-March, wherever is 1 month out. Like once I realize, like, okay, we're going to have everything by, let's say, 30 April, then about a month beforehand, we'll do a little bit of a pre-sale, discounted rate, that kind of thing. But anyway, it's moving forward, and it's looking good. Last on my list for today is the other thing that I'm working on, just a seasonal item, and that is the swarm traps. Now, if you don't have them, or any plans for them, go ahead and hit the Beekeeping for Newbies website. And there's a section in there with resources, and you can download some swarm trap plans. Basically, I think like a single piece of plywood will get you 3 swarm traps. And I think that I have used OSB and I've used plywood, and I definitely recommend spending like the extra $10 or whatever it might be to get plywood versus OSB. I think the biggest problem I had is the OSB swarm traps by themselves are working fine. There's no real issue with them. You need to get them painted right away. But the problem that I had was on the post that secures to the back of them where I strap it to the tree. I had some challenges with that, just getting it unstrapped and disconnected. And I ended up kind of ripping that post off of it, not at the base where it connects, but at the hole in the top where the wood is thinner on the edges. And I feel like if that was all plywood, it would have been more durable. So that was just kind of one thing. So I would say if you're going to use OSB, at least make a stronger support piece that you tie, a support post that you tie off to the tree with. But again, work within your budget. I think definitely the plywood is the way to go. But what I'm trying to do is I have 6 traps right now, and I'm going to have 2 of them at my house, 1 of them at a friend's house, a couple of them down at the apiary property. And where I messed up last year is I've noticed that in the, like down near the apiary and in the surrounding areas, the swarms will kick off a little bit earlier down there. Like we'll see swarms in like mid to late March. Whereas at my house, they tend to be more like early to mid-April. It's just a little bit behind. And I got the swarm traps up around 1 April, if I'm remembering correctly, last year. And I was kind of just behind a little bit. And I did not have any luck with them at the apiary. So we're going to get them hung up within the next month. Before March, I will have them hung all over wherever they're going to be. But part of my task here for the end of the winter, I'm taking all my swarm traps, getting the hive tool out, scraping everything out, making sure they're clean, making sure that anything that decided that it wanted to make a winter home in the ones that are still hung, we get them kind of cleaned out. And I'm also putting brand new, and I'm going to do a video on this just for frame assembly, because I think there's a lot of people who just don't even know how to assemble a basic frame. So we're going to do a video on how I assemble frames. It's a pretty straightforward process. You can do them individually, you can put them in a jig, or you can do what I do, which is just kind of put them into a long clamp, keep them in place, and then just kind of nail them with a nailer. But I'll show you how that's done. But I'm putting brand new frames with wax foundation into all the swarm traps this year. And I think this year I'm also going to switch away from Swarm Commander and just go to lemongrass oil. I've used both, and both of them have worked equally well, and lemongrass oil is about 75-80% cheaper. So if I have some Swarm Commander laying around, I'll use that too probably, but I'm going to try just the lemongrass oil this year, and we'll see how that works. Well, everybody, that's all I've got for this little update here, so don't worry too much about the cold. As long as the bees were ready going into the winter, they should be okay. For those of you down in the southern hemisphere, I hope you're enjoying your summer. And I know that some of the folks we talked to have had a little bit of rain down there, or a little bit more unusual levels of rain. So I hope things are drying out for you. But feel free to join us over there in the Discord room. This is the time of year where it starts to ramp up, and it happens every year. So if you're in the room now and you're like, Jeff, nobody's talking about anything, it's very typical. We have a ramp up that starts around now, and it goes pretty steady until around June timeframe, and then it'll start to taper again. So if you want to chat with people, hit the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage. There's a link to the Discord room there. There is a link in the podcast notes. You can check us out on YouTube if you'd rather listen commercial-free over on YouTube. That is certainly another option for you. But that's all I got. So take care, be kind to one another, and remember that I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.